So he seems to be proposing two separate actions. One is to reach an agreement with Rwanda. We assume that the idea of that is to get assurances, binding assurances from the Rwandans that they will treat any migrants we send to Rwanda in ways that meet some of the concerns that the court expressed, in particular that there was too many migrants who'd been moved to Rwanda under a deal I think they'd had with Israel, who ended up being deported into back to unsafe countries and things like that. And one of the things the court was very clear about was one of the problems was the UK had a memorandum of understanding, but didn't have legally binding status. So that's the treaty to answer some of the court's problems with Rwanda. The court didn't say the specifics of that country. The second thing he's going to do is to do some domestic legislation to, basically assert that Rwanda is a safe country, so that the UK government, the UK Parliament, is going to deem Rwanda a safe country. We haven't seen that legislation yet. We expect to see it quite soon because he said it would be emergency legislation, and we assume he'll try to rush it through very quickly.
And Jill, could these proposals face legal challenges as well?
I think it's almost inevitable that they will face legal challenges. We've just seen the outcome of a successful set of legal challenges, the government scheme that is already set up. There are a lot of people waiting to challenge this. I think the interesting thing is if there's an act of parliament which cuts off the UK route to legal challenge by saying, actually, this is what Parliament wants, and the UK courts don't overturn UK acts of Parliament, whether we then see a challenge, as he was foreshadowing in that clip you shared, through the European Court of Human Rights. Do people go and use those rights to challenge decisions of the UK courts and decisions of the UK Parliament?
But it normally takes several months for legislation to pass. But as you say, this emergency legislation could pass quite quickly. What happens next?
Well, it's not absolutely clear it would pass that quickly. When we normally do emergency legislation, it's sort of in response to a terrorist incident or because we've suddenly discovered there's some critical gap in powers, and we can legislate extremely fast. You can get bills doing all their stages in both the Commons and the House of Lords in a day. It's not clear, though, whether the House of Lords will regard this as nearly important as the government does. Government doesn't control time in the House of Lords, nor does it have a majority there. And it may very well be that quite a lot of people in the House of Lords, lots of experts, distinguished lawyers, people have real reservations about some of the substance on this. So it may end up as something of a battle between the Commons and the Lords. And then the question will be, would the Lords finally back down? If not, the government would have to wait a year from the bill's introduction to force it through under something called the Parliament Act. So it's not immediately clear he can get emergency legislation on the statute book in quite the way he hopes. So I think, the big things are lots of bits have to fall in place. We have to get an agreement with Rwanda. We have to see this legislation. It has to get through Parliament to be enacted. And then he'll need to start putting the logistics in place. But then, as you rightly said, he'd probably find himself back in the courts again. Well, politically, how damaging has this been for the Prime Minister and the government during a week when his Home Secretary, who had championed this failed policy, was sacked? Well, the Home Secretary actually, in her extraordinarily long and extraordinarily vituperative resignation letter, which she released a couple of days after being sacked, said to the Prime Minister, you have no plan B on that. I've tried all these sort of options on you and you don't listen to me, you don't write back, you don't let me in to see you. So she's already been preparing for, this is your fault, Prime Minister. You've been flogging a policy I told you was very risky and you haven't taken any options like, working earlier to say, I'm not going to take any notice of what any courts say. And various people are calling on him just to ignore the courts completely and go ahead. It's been very divisive within the Conservative Party. So I think it's very, very difficult for the Prime Minister because basically his problem is one of his big five promises was to stop the boats coming over. And this policy was, if you like, really the only plank in that stop the boats policy, which was to say to people, if you come over illegally into the UK, you will never have a route to settle in the UK, legitimate UK citizen status. If you come here illegally, and that was designed to act as a real deterrent as part of the government's strategy to stop the boats. Now, it wasn't clear it was necessarily going to have that effect, but the government was absolutely betting the house on that policy. The real problem for the Prime Minister was yesterday he actually chalked up a big success on one of his five priorities, which was to halve the rate of inflation from the very high rates we saw at the end of last year. But it was completely blown out of the water by the Rwanda court judgment. Nobody was talking about the big fall in inflation. Everybody was focusing on the government's plan absolutely hitting the rocks.
Meanwhile, the Rwandan government has taken issue with the Supreme Court ruling. What has it said? What is its position?
Well, Rwanda keeps on asserting that the aspersions that courts have placed on Rwanda are really unfair, because the courts have said, not only has Rwanda got a poor track record in the way it's treated migrants who've come there, it also lacks the institutional capacity to give the sort of necessary guarantees. This may be a source of challenge in the future, though the UK has said it will help Rwanda with administrative strengthening, that it can't really be trusted as a place. Obviously, if you're Rwanda, which has been interested in doing these deals with a number of countries, you don't want a foreign court denigrating you in quite that way. So I think that's where the Rwandans are. The Rwandans will have seen themselves as entering into a sort of innovative partnership. Rwanda's been paid quite a lot of money by the UK government for taking on this burden from us. So obviously Rwanda wants to make this work rather than be told that it's not a fit country to do it, which is effectively what the court did yesterday.
Jill Rutter, always great to have your views on our show. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.